Live and yes, it's live. So, hello everyone, and this is Onali from the Philosophy Room, and today we are in conversation with one of the greatest enlightened mind of our times, and it is
I
an
don't agree with it.
it is an honor.
Maybe An was speaking about himself.
It is an honor to have him on board. And first, I'll introduce the philosophy room in general, the project about what the philosophy room is about. Then I'll introduce the panel, and then we'll begin the conversation officially. So, the philosophy room is a small organization that has just one aim in mind. We have a very small team that works for philosophy. So our task, our aim is to bring philosophy to earth. That's pretty much what our aim is, and we have to generalize. And we are currently publishing magazines annually, so you can find them in Pakistani stores all across Pakistan. And second volume is coming out soon. This is the project, the philosophy. This is the pilot project of the philosophy room. I myself am honorary. I'm the chief patron of the philosophy room, and currently I'm doing quite a lot of things. And this is one. I'm in education sector right now. I'm teaching. At the same time, I'm publishing magazines. At the same time, I'm managing a lot of social media stuff, uh, just related to philosophy. So my life is also devoted to philosophy. The other panel member right now with us, who is also the part of the philosophy room from Italy, is Federico Giovannini. And he has been with us since the inauguration of the organization. And he has written articles for us, and he has been a really integral part of the organization. And he's doing his second master's right now. We met in London. We studied together in King's College London. And our special guest today is Slava Zizek, who is, his name is enough about how big he is. And I'm really glad that finally we have him on board. And today we are going to talk about different topics, starting from climate change. But first of all, I will introduce Zizek's book that is coming out next month. All of you can have it. And it's the title itself is interesting. It is Heaven in Disorder and not Heaven under Disorder. So that is quite interesting. And Slava himself will talk about the book a bit, and then we will go on to the climate change topic, and then officially ask the questions with him.
It's me now. Perfect. Yes. Thank you very much. First, let me know that it's also sincerely, not as a rhetorical answer, an honor for me to talk with you, because we, in a spontaneous racist way in Europe, when we read about Pakistan, its conflict with India, inner conflicts, all that stuff, but I am often pleasantly surprised, and Pakistan is one of the cases, to discover how very serious intellectual life is going on there. I like how you described philosophy room. I would put it in terms of European philosophy. Immanuel Kant, the great thinker of Enlightenment, I will repeat an old point of mine, who distinguished between private and public use of reason. Public use for Kant is not state public affairs. No, this is for him all private. Private in the sense that an institution sets in advance the coordinates, and you just are free to debate a little bit how to achieve these goals. But philosophy begins not with solving problems simply, which are formulated by some higher authority. Philosophy begins by reflecting on how we formulate problems themselves? Are we asking the right questions? Where is the formulation of problem itself already a form of mystification? And this is what is needed today more than ever. Public space means even we now, although it's just a couple of us and so on, we stand for the public space. We are good citizens ready to obey when the state administration does something rational, fighting against a pandemic or whatever. But we need this freedom to think outside the coordinates prescribed by those in power. And that's extremely, now I'm coming to your topic, our topic, global warming and climate change. That's extremely important today when we all agree that we have problems, but quite often the way we formulate problems is part of the problem. We philosophers cannot give clear answers. People ask me, what should we do about climate change? No, I cannot give the answer, but I can point out where I see the limits of how we raise this question. That's why I talk in the title of my book that you kindly mentioned about heaven in disorder. Because till now, all great ideological formations, liberalism, religions, fascism, and so on, admitted that our earth is in disorder, but they still counted on a higher order in heaven. This heaven is not necessarily a religious heaven. It means simply that beneath all the apparent chaos, there is some, maybe not divine plan, but some general direction towards progress, history has meaning, and so on. You know who, I say this with all respect, which was for me the best embodiment of this belief in heavenly order. I remember when Kabul fell to Taliban, a local Taliban leader was interviewed, asked, I don't know what, and his answer was, you must know it, it was popular even here, you in the West, you have excellent watches to measure time, but time, we have time itself. Time is on our side. I am not able to afford such a comfortable position that somebody can act on behalf of time itself, in the sense of the flow of time. History, in that sense, God is on our side. We have a higher guarantee that we will win. Today, I don't know how it is in Pakistan, but maybe it's even worse in Western developed countries. Heaven itself is in disorder, which means not only earth in its disorder, crisis, and so on, but we often don't speak the same language. We often hear these calls, we must all come together and debate and so on, debate things, find a common language. Sorry, let's be clear, in United States, there is no common language between partisans of Donald Trump and Democratic left. We are already in a state of at least ideological civil war. Heaven itself, how we think, how we approach reality is in disorder. So going to climate change, first I like that you use the word climate change and not global warming. That's my first problem. Global warming, sorry, global warming already fetishizes one element, and then you almost start thinking in magical numbers, as it is happening now in Glasgow. You know, this famous 1.5 degrees. This is, we don't know if this is true. Maybe already with 1% there will be a catastrophe or whatever. It's crucial to see the complexity of our ecological crisis. It's not just global warming. The first thing to add is that the problem is not so much global warming as the growing extremes. You can get in the same country at some point time without rain, and then a couple of months later, extreme floods, too much water, not enough water, too much water, extremes are growing. Then the problem is, I think, maybe even greater than global warming. The problem is the immense amount of trash. I think this is the fundamental ontological fact today. We know about millions, billions of tons of plastic and so on, which is just useless circulating around. People usually identify capitalism with social dynamic. Everything is changing, always new inventions and so on and so on. But I think this is the other side of capitalism. And I think, and I don't mean this, of course, in any sense in a pejorative way to attack immigrants or refugees, but aren't in this sense refugees today also a kind of a human waste? Not, that's a scandal that they are treated like this. Like, you know, they have no use. They cannot be recycled. They just come, they don't have any function and so on. And so in this sense, waste in general, inclusive of human waste, and again, I repeat it, it's horrible that we have to talk about human waste, but this is how the system treats them and produces them. Would you agree or not? That's my first question to you and to our public, that humanitarians who react to this with sympathy and call for solidarity are too short here. Now, I don't know how it is with you, but in Europe, we all talk about what is happening on the border between Poland and Belarus. Refugees gathering there and so on and so on. It's not enough to say it's inhuman, refugees should be, of course this is provided for, of course this is true. But the solution is not just more charity. It's absolutely clear that the solution is to change the situation which makes refugees refugees. And here is the responsibility of the West. It's not that there is chaos in those countries and then people are coming here and now are we humanitarian or not? No, we should go a step further. First, why this explosion of refugees? It's clear that we should talk here about not classical colonialism, but different, not just military, but political, geopolitical, economic, and so on interventions. You know, for example, without American intervention in Iraq, not just Afghanistan, but also Iraq, there wouldn't have been ISIS, probably crisis in Syria, and probably the degree of refugees would have been much lower, and so on and so on. So you see my point. Yeah. As a philosopher, I'm saying, I'm not proposing solutions. Yeah. Don't get caught in this humanitarian trap. Let's open our heart. No, it's not enough to open our heart to them. We have to change the global situation, because the situation we have now of mutual codependence means that the solution is not. Sometimes when I speak to humanitarians, they sound as if the solution is simply let's open our borders and all who want to come can come here. First, I think that those who come here, I'm more and more convinced, I read some statistics, are not those who are truly the worst victims there.
Yeah.
They are those who can afford to pay all the bribes and so on. What remains there in Syria, Iraq, they are the true catastrophe. So the problem is not, the problem is not just humanitarian, let's take care of them. No, let's change the entire situation. Second thing, I will just propose a couple of ideas here. Second thing, one of the fashionable reactions to ecological crisis, climate change, and so on, is that we, humanity, were too arrogant, that, as it is popular to say, we should finally accept that we are just one of the species of living beings on this earth, and we should accept our moderate place. No, I'm totally opposed to this. You know why? Because first, we screwed the situation already so much that, of course, we are one of the species, but we destabilized the entire complex of life reproduction on Earth. So it's not enough to say, let's become one of the modest species. When we talk about controlling the rise of temperature and so on, we don't act as one of the species. We act as some kind of a managers of life on Earth itself. And I think this is not arrogance. We are forced to act like that. We should act universally. Just one more point, then you can interrupt me. Second thing, I also don't agree when the problem is formulated in the terms of we, humanity, ruined natural balance, we have to return to it. Is this true, the case? Isn't the entire history of life on Earth, even before humans were here, isn't it, my God, full of mega catastrophes? Look at oil and coal, our now still greatest source of energy. Can we even imagine what kind of catastrophes must have happened on Earth years ago for us to have these sources of energy? Today we survive because we use the leftovers of mega ecological catastrophes. And so again, my provocative claim, I like to repeat it, there is no Mother Earth. If there is a Mother Earth, it's an evil, dirty bitch, you know. It's not a good mother protecting us and so on. We are, but listen, Federico, you want to say something, I give you the word. Or just the boss, the leader does this.
First the boss. We have to be like strictly organized, like, like a proper party.
So I'll just chip in Federico now, and Federico has a question on climate change, specifically on human ontology. So can you please go?
Yeah, so like basically you already anticipated and made the perfect introduction on the question, because as you already said, we have first of all, like in philosophical terms, we have the task of understanding if the question is right, so if we frame our problems in the right way. And then secondly, you said we often frame the issue of climate change in terms of humanity made a mess, hubris towards nature, and nature is good, and we have all these deep ecological things. And our question is exactly regarding our conception of humanity, nature, and their relationship, because the general idea when ordinary people, even in media, discuss climate change, there's always this idea, oh, nature is taking good and just revenge on humanity. And I thought, okay, we have a problem here. Because first of all, obviously, it's not humanity in itself which is causing the problem, but it's a specific, a world economic system arrangement which is causing the problem. And somehow we are also like part of nature itself. And as you said, nature is you took like a Leopardi's view that nature is a mother and a bitch. Which is correct. I know it's exactly like our article was about the idea that nature is a cruel place. And I think that instead of trying to decide whether we have to respect nature, we have to treat her well, or nature is right or not, we have to like go beyond this and maybe understand that we are part of nature, but nature is a cruel place. So we have to understand where this cruelty is coming from, and clearly it cannot come from like natural bodies, like plants, waves, or tsunamis themselves. It must come from a human source cruelty, because we can't ascribe moral responsibility to a tsunami itself. So maybe we should see where this cruelty is coming from, and if we do that, we see that it's coming from a specific class. Which is running world capitalist arrangements. Also, because, first of all, when we discuss something, we should ask why we care for it. We care for climate change because it causes cruelty towards human beings somehow. This is ultimately the real truth. So, like, our question was really how we should reconceptualize, even though I already made a clear proposal about how to reconceptualize it, but you can further, discuss this. Our idea of humanity, nature, and cruelty, what part we play in this, and everything you already introduced.
No, it's very good point that you make now. Listen, I talked recently with some mega historians. By mega, I mean not big names, but who try to classify the entire development of humanity. And they claim that we should move beyond Marx. The first great break was not class society, but even before Neolithic, in the sense of the move from nomadic tribes to settled population with agriculture and so on, which brought patriarchy, stable agricultural and so on, and then capitalism. That capitalist modernity is a mega shock also towards nature itself. And in the spirit of international cooperation, I would move even further east from you, my friends in Pakistan, and mention a Japanese guy called Kohei Saito, who wrote a book on eco-socialism and pointed out how in the last 10 years of his life, Marx himself became obsessed with this problem, how capitalist production is disturbing the natural rhythm and so on and so on. So if we talk about cruelty triggered by humanity, I agree, and I'm not blaming simply capitalism, but I agree that globally this capitalist modernization is the ultimate source. Although, on the other hand, we should not idealize the previous times. Horrible things were done and so on. But nonetheless, capitalist modernity with colonization and so on was such a shock to nature itself. Let's take a simple example that I like. You know that already in Marxist time, around 1850, the agriculture in Europe, because of the exhaustion of nature, was close to collapsing. Not enough manure and so on. And then it's a first example, incredible, of mega ecological colonization. You know what is guano, I think? on the coast of Peru, birds drop their shit, it mixes with earth, and it's concentrated manure, which is extremely good to fertilize fields. That's why the British colonized the Peruvian coast, bringing there tens of thousands of Chinese workers, which were basically treated like slaves. And you know that it's incredible what a mega operation this was. They were just cutting off pieces of this bird's feet mixed with grass manure, bringing into Europe. And so the European agriculture in Germany and in England survived. And then they didn't need it so much because they invented, through the help of science, artificial fertilizers and so on and so on. But here we can see clearly the connection between modernization, ecological damage, imbalance, and colonialism. This is especially important today. I agree with some of my friends who claim, and it's obvious for me, I don't know the situation precise in Pakistan or there, but even in the West, and I know the situation a little bit in Latin America, where they explain it nicely, how we should no longer focus just on the classical Marxist notion of proletariat, a worker who sells his labor power to a capitalist and is then exploited and so on and so on. Today, when we have many of precarious workers, unemployed, or workers whose work is not properly valorized, like women doing homework and so on, that I will say something very ironical, that to be a classical Marxist worker, proletariat, I sell my labor force, I have a permanent job and so on, at least in a developed Western state, to be this is almost already a privileged position.
Yeah,
today we should bring in focus all the forms of non-valorized work. By non-valorized, I don't mean it hasn't any value, but it's not directly the part of capitalist reproduction.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it had an echo in Pakistan also. A debate, now it's over, but a couple of months ago, between some historians and some protectors of Jewish tradition. When some historians, that African guy Mbembe or what, and Habermas took his side, insisted on the uniqueness of Holocaust, like this is the mega crime, incomparable with others, while other historians pointed out the horrors of colonization. And I think that although everybody formally admits the horrors of colonization, but one should talk about this with details. It's not just slavery. You know what's the biggest irony here already? It was brought out nicely by, I think it was Jacques Rancière or Etienne Balibar, of how at the very moment with modernity, when in Europe everybody was talking about freedom, human rights, and so on, against all forms of slavery, isn't it ironic that in the form of colonization, slavery exploded at this time? They were seeing slavery in all social forms. Are women slaves to men? Isn't a worker a slave to his boss, and so on? But they ignored literal slavery. There were slaves. Slavery in around 1500, just before modernity, slavery was almost abolished. It was minimal. And then with colonization of Africa, of Americas, slavery exploded again. This is the big trauma of capitalism. But I would go, if I may just conclude, then you can counterattack because it's easy to get lost here in details. I think that I don't know enough about the situation in Pakistan and that part, but what I'm afraid of is I'm now reading many literature and I tend to agree with them, namely with theorists who claim that we shouldn't focus any longer just on criticizing neoliberalism, that capitalism is now gradually changing into something new. It's even a question if we can still call it capitalism. Some people call this corporate neofeudalism. Look at figures like Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Bill Gates. They are not just profiteering. Their wealth comes from the fact that they privatized our commons. The commons of personal communications, you have to go to Facebook. They are like feudal lords who have control over a certain space and then get a rent from this, not a profit, more a rent. And in this sense, I don't agree with how the Chinese are doing it. They are doing it in a very brutal way, the Chinese. But I can understand why they now moved against the big capital, billionaires in China. They saw correctly how capitalism is moving into this new neo-feudal phase, and they try to limit that. I don't agree with how they are doing, but I think the problem today is this one. It's not enough just to criticize neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is now retreating in front of something, I think, much more ominous. This how our living space is totally controlled by new privatized mega corporations. And here society will have to intervene. Sorry, please.
Yeah. You pointed out one really nice thing about the Holocaust point that you just mentioned, that, whenever there is a talk about the Holocaust, especially in post-colonial states like Pakistan and India, I remember when I was in London and I used to talk to Indian friends, and they used to say this, that, they always mention the Holocaust, but what about the 1 million that died during the partition in 1947? So, they always have this contrast of tragedies between the partition time and the Holocaust. But now it depends upon how you interpret one tragedy and how you interpret the other tragedy, because they are not quite similar, in the sense that one was a result of post-colonialism, a direct result of post-colonialism, the partition one, and the other one was just brutal madman killing people. But nonetheless, the interesting thing is that there is always this contrast between the Holocaust and the partition of 1947.
Yeah.
And this brings me to my question as well. Given this history of the partition, and given this history of the separation of the subcontinent, we were ruled by the Mughals, by the Muslims. Before that, we were ruled by the Hindus. After that, the British came, the Hindus, then Muslims, Mughals, then the British, and now it is pretty much everyone. I mean, so there is, it's not like we can say, okay, we have this influence or that influence. We drink tea every day. I don't know. I think on average, every Pakistani drinks tea at least 2 times a day, which is a British thing. And we study in British schools. We go out and watch Hollywood movies. We listen to Indian songs. Now there is so much merging of cultures. And I was wondering that how can we somehow bring in Hegelian concept of the synthesis, if it can help us to make us realize what is our national identity as such. Because we, unless we can pinpoint to something that this is what we are, or this is who we are, can somehow Hegel help us over here, or some concept of Hegel help us over here as to how in this dynamic structure of cultural hot pot, I would say, sort of, can we say, okay, no, everything is moving. Okay, we are listening to Indian songs, or we are watching Pakistani movies or American movies. How all of these cultures can actually have a static point which can be called a national identity?
It's a very nice question. I will try to improvise an answer. First, just to return briefly to that partition, Holocaust, and so on. Yes, Holocaust was unique in the sense that it was done in an unheard of industrial way, exactly planned. Killing was done not as a spontaneous slaughter, but literally, industrially, and so on. And so in this sense, it was unique. But again, I find it obscene even to compare, let's say, Holocaust with, okay, the example that we all know today, Belgian Congo, where the slaughter was absolutely incredible, and it was also done in a well-calculated way. It was the brutality which was heartbreaking. I read a book on how Belgian Congo was colonized. They wanted, what is the, how is that stuff called? I'm really getting old and senile. The car tires, rubber. What do you make them of?
I think they're made of that hard stuff which comes out of
trees.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, let's skip the name. But
Yeah.
you know what was the problem of Belgian colonizers there? They wanted that stuff. The problem is they didn't yet have plantations. So they have to employ people who were allowed to run around freely. You know how they solved the problem? And this was done methodically. They entered a local indigenous village. They grabbed all the women, usually chained them to a tree, serially raped them, and then they said to husbands, after you bring us so much quantity of that stuff, you will get your wife back. That's how they were doing it. And it was also an incredible slaughter and so on. On the other hand, you know what makes the example of not Holocaust, but Zionism for me a little bit problematic? You know, recently I took a look at Herzl, Theodor, the founder of Zionism, his book, A Jewish State. Do you know that, for obvious conformist reasons, do you know that Herzl wrote a letter to Cecil Rhodes, you know, Rhodesia, Rhodes, the big British colonizer, asking for his support? The idea was, we will, on behalf of the West, colonize Palestine, and we will be their protective wall against the Oriental primitivism and so on. So the paradox of the return to Israel was that it was a form of decolonization for the Jews. We will no longer be dominated by Christians. But at the same time, it was explicitly formulated as a colonialist problem. They openly used these terms at the beginning. They said, yes, we are colonizing this part of the world. Now, what you said about this multiculturalism and so on, yes, I would agree with your idea of synthesis. Synthesis in this sense. Today, it's too late already to speak about returning to any form of authentic national culture. Don't forget something which is horrible. That's my own thesis. Colonizers love return to previous local cultures because their idea is British mastered this excellently. British didn't want in their India, which was not yet partitioned. They didn't want local people to learn Western sciences and so on. They want them in their pre-colonial state sticking to their old tradition so that they will remain on their own place there. What the British were really afraid was that you, who were part of British India, you would appropriate Western science, art, and so on, but in your own way. And I will be very precise here, not just in your own local way, but in a way which will be, I use this term ironically, more authentically Western than West itself meant it. Because already Gandhi saw this, and others, that the West didn't live up to its own principles. They talk about equality, freedom, and so on, but they didn't respect it. So that's my first point. There is no return to some original culture and so on. What you can do is, as you said, we live in this plurality, and in a way it's good, because one of the effects of this plurality is paradoxically that it even, potentially at least, weakens the domination of high Western culture. You know what's nonetheless good, what is happening in the last decades? I remember when I was, it's totally a personal recollection, when I was young, detective novels, which I admit it, my private scene, I like them, they had to happen in England, then with hard-boiled novel, United States, maybe France, and so on. With Germany, it was already a problem. Now, in the last decade, we have an explosion of detective novels written in smaller European countries, even in Eastern European countries, so that they appropriated a Western form, giving it a new spin, and the miracle is this, what they showed, and that's for me true multiculturalism. It's not that you avoid this stupid choice, either my own original culture or the West. You do something where you remain faithful to your culture, but using the Western media and forums so that precisely in your specificity, you become universal. I will give you my favorite example, although I don't like so much the novels. I think they are affected and so on. You remember 20, 30 years ago, how Gabriel Garcia Marquez and others' magical realism was popular, 100 Years of Solitude and so on. They did something very specific, and this is why they succeeded globally, that they appropriated in a new way their own specific tradition. That's, I think, what should be a model. In what sense? Again, I must say, I have problems with Salman Rushdie. For me, he is too liberal and so on. But I don't know if you know this story of mine, I like to repeat it. Once I was at a round table with him, and he reported this story, that somebody accused him of being, of betraying his Indian origins, of just being part of now of the British literary space. And he said something wonderful. He said, no, the biggest influence on me were two great Indian writers. And you know whom he mentioned? Jane Austen and Charles Dickens. You know? And it was a correct answer. He said that if you want to understand this Indian in Mumbai, middle classes, half impoverished, it's the world of Jane Austen. You have too many daughters, how to marry them. The poverty in India is Dickens, Oliver Twist, and so on. You know, I find this idea wonderful that you use another culture, its products, to gain a better view approach to your own culture, and also to provide a new original reading of that great of work itself. For example, sorry, I will immediately conclude, but just that's my nicest example, Dostoevsky, Idiot. You know, which is for me the best movie version of it, made by Akira Kurosawa in Japan in 47. It's in a totally different context. It's very Japanese, but it opens up a new reading of Dostoevsky itself. It's not simply foreign. Or the same for me with Shakespeare. Kurosawa did a wonderful version in early 60s of Hamlet with a wonderful title. The title is wonderful. Bad people can sleep well. Only bad people, because they have no ethics, can sleep well. That's what would have been my formula. Don't be afraid that you are not global enough, that you should listen to Hollywood or whatever. Yes, listen to Hollywood, to Western music, but then with the hope that a miracle will happen and you will discover how to articulate your identity in it. It's happening. For example, detective novels, we get them from all around, or movies. You know, remember, there was already 15, 20 years ago, a moment of Taiwanese movies, a moment of South Korean movies, Romanian movies, and so on. Global multiculturalism doesn't mean we will all drink Coke and watch Hollywood. It opens the space for all of us. We just have to use it. That's why I think that, I will stop immediately, that if we think anti-colonialism as, let's return to our national roots and so on, it's a catastrophe. Countries like Pakistan, India, whoever, can do much more. They can reformulate their own tradition in a new way, which will have a global appeal. That's the hope.
You are absolutely.
Imperialism can be beaten, cultural imperialism, within its own space. For example, I know him. I don't know how does he exist at all in your Pakistan, but isn't the writer Hanif Qureshi from Pakistan? And the whole point is that what he writes about English life and so on is so clearly based in his unique Pakistani experience. He is not simply assimilated to the English space. And it's exactly from this perspective that he pointed out many inherent antagonism, contradictions, falsities in the English way of life. I don't think that indigenous people of any country, United States included, can fully understand themselves. No, you need a little bit of alienation, a foreign gaze. You know, that's why look at the big European writers. James Joyce, to give us a portrait of Ireland, had to move to, he was in Trieste and then in Zurich. Sam Beckett, for me, the greatest Irish writer, even changed language and started to write in French and so on. Don't be afraid of this mixture.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, there's a book that has come out which is called Writing in Pakistan, something like that. In that, the author actually goes around and interviews all the English authors that he could find. And he has mentioned the fact that there is not a single English Pakistani writer living in Pakistan. And each one of them. Now there are coming, there are a few writers that have just emerged. But before this, most of these writers, they have lived abroad and then written about Pakistan from abroad. And this has created this tendency of, in our youth especially, for artists, that it is not that we have to hold on to one strand, as you were saying, that it's not that we have to either become an American or British or Indian or this. This either or doesn't work in cultural in cultural identity. It's much more like, okay, you read this and it might happen that, for example, that you can go to Sufi poetry or you can go to Mullah Sadra, let's say, and you might find something which is really hitting home, and you can create something which may become a glimmer of hope in this, and it might, you know, tie everything together such that you can create an identity which is not in conflict with all of these, and is also much more helpful for you personally speaking, so that you can build upon it as an identity content, sort of.
Yes, that's very important. And also, again, not just an identity for you, but an identity which becomes recognizable around the world. And if I may add just a theoretical conclusion, this shows nicely how I don't like this obsession of some so-called deconstructionists or feminists, some feminists, I generally totally support them, who think every identity is bad. It's almost fascist, you know, that we should be just fluid, reconstruct ourselves. No, I believe in identities, not in the sense of this fanatical Western identity politics, but identity in the sense that you described it. Identity built on the very interaction through others and so on. So yes, I'm for identity. I don't like this celebration of diversity in the sense that, like, if you just have, even at the level of sex, if you just have one identity, you are heterosexual, then you are some kind of retarded and so on and so on. No, be what you want, but define your identity not through the fear of others, but through interaction with others. Yes, I agree with you. That would have been the true Hegelian synthesis, where what may first appear to you as an obstacle, my God, foreigners are a threat to us. Yes, they are a threat to you. Colonialism exists in a very brutal way. But again, the art is to build a new identity through this interaction, to use the enemy to help you build your identity. And that's, I think, the task today in this global society. And I especially like here, I have hope for Pakistan here, because I know from my friends like Udi Aloni, who was in Kashmir and so on. I'm not playing a nationalist here, pro-Pakistani, but I think the fact that you didn't get Kashmir was a deep false manipulation from India, no? Because I think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that in India, the rule of partition was the one who is the ruling Maharaja or leader there. But the problem with Kashmir is that the top guy was Hindu, but the majority of the population was Muslim, no?
Muslim, yeah, exactly, yeah.
At India, they get it, no?
Yeah, exactly.
This is the original thing. But I have, what I am said is, I think that from what I know already from writers and others that I know of Pakistani origin, that Pakistan does have a great, how should I call it, spiritual potential. For example, I forgot his name, but didn't you have already at the beginning of 20th century, I'm very sorry to forget his name, a big Muslim
poet.
theologist? Sorry?
A Muslim poet, Iqbal.
Who was he the guy who even wrote a wonderful text of him complaining to God?
Yeah, that's Iqbal, poet. Yeah.
You see, this is mega theology. I like this. Here we can learn with each other. I would love, but I'm too stupid, to see how that point of complaining against God could be read together with the Christian motive of the book of Job, you know,
Yeah.
when you ask God, but why is this happening to me, and so on. That I don't think it's necessarily sinful to raise this question of what if God necessarily sometimes appears to us as not good, doing something that we simply cannot comprehend, and so on and so on. Here, serious theology begins. So you see, here I would like to have a dialogue and so on. And
I mean,
maybe, yes.
It's good that you mentioned Iqbal's complaint, because you know what happened when he published that complaint, and then the theologians of the time, they questioned, they were like, how can you complain against God? And then Iqbal wrote a reply to that complaint, which was actually God speaking to all the people. And so that's called the reply to the complaint. It's a very big poem, and that became more famous than the actual complaint, actually, because the theologians.
No, I like this, because you see, that's the logic of dialogue. And this we should apply also to relations between nations, that you, here I believe in contingency. You write a book, particular book, but then reacting on critical reactions to this book or work, your work becomes much more universal. The real thing emerges only through the reaction to what you did, double reaction, and so on. That's what we need today, without any mystification. For example, I liked it when I read a critical work, Zen at War. I think we should demystify all religions here. It's popular today to say this Western, no, not Western, the three religions of the book, Islam, Judaism, Christianity, are cruel, brutal, but Oriental, they are much better, Buddhism, and so on. No, there is also what we would have called today inappropriately violent terrorist side in Buddhism. There is a book called by somebody called Brian Victoria, but he is Japanese, Zen at War, where he points out how during World War II, practically all Zen Buddhists justified Japanese imperialism in China. Nobody has a clear position here. And it's through such critique of Zen Buddhism that I think I understood much more deeply Buddhism itself. I still respect it, but I see all the ambiguity in it.
That is the spirit that we are also following in Pakistan. Now we are becoming in literature much more pluralistic, you would say, but keeping true to the cultural traditions, if possible.
Yeah, it's very important what you said now. Pluralism doesn't mean this postmodern mess, you know. All voices are just mixed and so on and so on. As Hegel would have said, or even other Marxists, we always have here the structure of, let's say, over-determination. Plurality is never neutral. There is always one color which structures the totality, which predominates. Like, we can do movies like Hollywood, but we must give a specific color to them. We shouldn't just copy Hollywood or whatever, you know. And also, we should not be afraid to, not only to bring out where there is implicit racism in Hollywood, but also positive potentials in Hollywood and so on. Can I conclude with to give you an example?
Yes,
I don't know how it is in Pakistan or in Italy, but is in your countries also so popular this new Korean, South Korean TV series, Squid Game?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah,
many leftists falsely celebrate it as, you know, the anti-capitalism. You see, this is capitalism, blah, blah, blah. But I learned from my Korean friends two paradoxes. First, you know that this series is almost less popular in South Korea itself than abroad. And point two, it's much more tricky. It's not really capitalist. If you saw some episodes, you see that what bothers the hero is not this cruel game for survival to pay your debt, but that this game is rigged. It's not really a neutral game, that they are cheating. So basically, what the series advocates is an honest game. And this is already ideology. Like, yes, why not? We have a game, you fight for your life, but let's do it honestly. They want honest, brutal capitalism. So this like, is also what we should be very attentive with a lot of today's anti-capitalists. They don't really problematize the system itself, but just some excesses. They want an honest game. No, I don't want an honest game. I don't want simply a game where you have to fight for your survival, honest or not, you know.
Yeah, also, I mean, because you also in this way assume that there can be a state of organizing society which can be somehow neutral or fair to everyone. So you have, you know, like, if you assume that, you know, a game is wrong because it's just brutal or unequal or unfair, then you assume implicitly that there can be another game in which there can be a consensus behind it, you know, and everyone's happy. And this is completely false, you know. And
this brings us to another theoretical problem, which I don't have a solution. I just want to bring out the problem. It's clear with today's global problems that democracy, as we know it in the West, multi-party democracy, is not strong enough in the sense that democracy privileges, you just worry, by you, I mean those who are in power, will we be re-elected in 2 years, in 4 years, and so on. What is urgent today is what China can afford. Since they don't fear losing the elections, they can afford to make big plans. How will we doing the next 20, 30 years, and so on and so on. Now, don't misunderstand me. I don't want to do it in a Chinese way, you know. But we have obviously to change in the West, the standard multi-party system, so that it will be able to cope with these problems. Otherwise, look where we are now in Glasgow. It's totally watered down, no big compromise there. We are not yet there. And this is the big challenge ahead of all of us, Pakistan, Western Europe, and so on, how to do the necessary step towards greater coordination, organization, but not in the Chinese way, not in the you know, like how to keep public administration powers, big capital under social control, but not in an authoritarian way. That's the big task today, I think.
No, that is very important, because right now Chinese influence in Pakistan is increasing day by day because we are just its neighbor. And currently, the intellectuals in Pakistan, they are really struggling from this fact, like how is it that we are going to cope with the Chinese influence, given the fact that they are also influencing our education system, especially.
I didn't know this, even education.
Yeah, exactly. Now it is becoming compulsory to study Chinese in the primary schools.
I didn't know this. My God, I didn't know this.
Yeah, so it is becoming really concrete now, and now the intellectuals they are really like they are just wary. They are skeptical. It's not like they have a negative judgment of them, but they are like, how is it that we are going to include our culture in this, because the official religion in China is atheism. So I mean, how are you going to, you know, because language influences your thought process.
Absolutely, yeah.
Your culture. How is it that you are going to do and there is no really solution that we can see on the horizon.
But you know what you have to bear in mind always? It's clear how China dealt with Afghanistan after Taliban victory. They simply made a deal. We respect, acknowledge you, but you don't mess into our business with Uyghurs, with their, So the way I would advise you to deal is that China is simply looking for food and mining, raw stuff, resources, and markets all around. And on the one hand, they can be very brutal, supporting dictatorships and so on. On the other hand, they can be very pragmatic. And I think that you should treat them as a ruthless but necessary partner and simply deal with them at this, okay, you want this raw stuff for us, I don't know what they want from you and so on. Just deal openly with them. But on the other hand, do what they are doing now to your own. Like, for example, their own people. For example, now in China, they are imposing Han culture on all others and so on. And this tendency in China of the new Han patriotism, they no longer like to use the word communism now. They talk about patriotism, But it's a very narrow authoritarian patriotism. And I think they will pay the price. But I didn't know, but I know what's the logic. Since India under Modi is now much more pro-American and Israeli, of course, you were pushed in this direction.
Exactly. Geopolitically, we are in this direction because of precisely what you just said. Because India is the only actor in this region which is outside Chinese influence. Everyone else is just under Chinese influence. You have Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq. All of these people are just, and Central Asia. Except for India, everyone has almost accepted that Chinese influence should be incorporated in our government practices.
Yeah, but I think that this is more a matter of ideological struggle. It can be done that you retain your culture and also not simply open up the space for the Chinese, but my God, act like they do in their own country, control their influence and so on. Listen, I'm close to collapsing now. Can we slowly bring it to, I'm so sorry.
Yes.
But we can repeat this in a couple of months if you want. I admire so much this, like I had a wonderful debate at Kobane, Kurdish University in north of Syria.
Yeah, I listened to that.
These are miracles which are happening, that you discover global intellectual life. You discover how false this fake multiculturalism is, this fake identity of, you cannot understand me because you cannot imagine. No, we can understand each other. Understanding is possible. I never believed in this bullshit, Only a European can understand Europe. Only a Chinese can understand China. No, sometimes I'm tempted to say from an external gaze, you can maybe sometimes even understand better a country than they themselves understand.
That's right.
That's why, for example, that's why I like, although I see where you see the problem, some Pakistani writers in England, because I claim, at least in England, to understand what is going on in England today. Forget about the stupid British writers, read Pakistani writers there. That's the paradox. Sorry, I have now to collapse.
That is fine.
I'm very grateful, and we keep in touch, and with pleasure we can repeat it.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
And you, Giovannini, tell me, are you of Scandinavian origins that you know? Federico Giovannini means the son of Giovanni, like Johansson in Nordic countries. So now I will conclude with my usual racist insult. Giovannini, that means you in your mafia terrain, you didn't yet discover properly family names, It's like Federico Giovannini, the son of Giovanni.
You're the second person today that tells me. I went to the bar and then this guy said to me, "Oh, you look Dutch," and now you say you're Scandinavian. I have to emigrate back to the north because.
But I like, that's my only problem with, if I were to live in Pakistan, I would go to your snowy mountains in the north. I like cold. I'm sorry. I like cold. I would have gone up.
I don't.
No. Okay. Thanks very much. I have to run now, but it was
Thanks
a pleasure.
a lot.
It was. Thanks a lot, Zizek. Bye, Zizek. Thanks a lot.
Bye. Thank you. Leave.
Wait a second. I'll just.
Do we say bye to people online?
Wait a second.
Can I EP?